I thought it would be fun to ask ChatGPT to try and save the Roman Republic. Instead of simply describing how the Republic could be reformed, I wanted to see how the AI would perform if it had to play inside a simulated ancient Mediterranean. To do this, I asked an instance of GPT-5 thinking to create a persona, pick a year, and a place to be born, and then design a life plan for rising through Roman politics. At the same time, I instructed Google's Gemini Pro 2.5 to run a simulation of the ancient world, including all the powers, factions, and individuals of the late 2nd and 1st centuries BCE, and to react dynamically to whatever ChatGPT did. Each time ChatGPT proposed an action, Gemini would update the simulation, determine the consequences, and then hand the results back to me. It was a turn-based game between the two AIs, and my job was to ask ChatGPT for his next move and then feed Gemini's answer regarding the simulation back to ChatGPT. From the start, I made it clear that the goal of the exercise was not to become the next Caesar. On the contrary, the objective was to keep the Roman Republic alive, to reform it so that it would be immune to tyranny or foreign domination, and that its civic ideals could survive well beyond their collapse in our timeline. ChatGPT chose the name Publius alias Sabinus. He set his birthday in 108 BC and selected the small hill town of Arpinum in southern Latium as his birthplace. Rather than being a patrician born into the heart of Roman political life, Sabinus was to be the son of an equestrian family, wealthy enough to own olive groves and to hold shares in tax farming syndicates, yet still an outsider to Rome's old patrician clans. His father, Lucius alias Paulus, invested in grain transport and road maintenance contracts. His mother, Tullia Secunda, insisted that her children read Latin and Greek literature. This background gave Sabinus access to money, education, and the world of provincial administration, but not to the deeply entrenched networks of the Roman nobility. From childhood, Sabinus learned double-entry bookkeeping, grain logistics, and the ways of the countryside. He ran olive presses, balanced ledgers, and memorized tolls and currents on the Liris River. Far more importantly, he became fascinated by systems, not heroes. He attended Arpinum's local Consular to watch magistrates dispense justice, and he wrote down what he saw. By his teens, he was convinced that the Republic lives or dies on loyalty channels, who soldiers swear to, and who feeds Rome, and who audits governors. At 13, he began a journal, the Commentari de Disciplina Civica, with 3 recurring maxims: oath to the state, pay from the treasury, and justice in the provinces. Unlike Marius, Sulla, or Pompey, whose careers revolved around battlefield glory, Sabinus would make accounting ledgers and logistics the foundations of his power. At 14, he moved to Rome, boarding with a family friend on the Aventine Hill. For 4 years, he watched trials in the Basilica Portia, listened to orators in the Forum, and copied speeches by lamplight. In 91 BC, the Social War erupted as Rome's Italian allies rebelled against their second-class status. Sabinus joined a cousin staff and witnessed the carnage at Asculum. He saw Samnite villagers lay down arms and join Rome only when promised fair tribal enrollment. The war convinced him that the only way to preserve the Republic was to integrate all Italians as equals and to regulate generals' access to their soldiers. As Sulla marched on Rome and launched his proscriptions, Sabinus kept his head down and continued his studies, radicalized by the realization that a constitution built on unwritten norms could be hijacked by personal armies. After the Social War, Sabinus returned to Rome and studied civil law under Quintius Mucius Scaevola and rhetoric under Plotius Gallus. He befriended earnest young Italians newly enfranchised and founded the Sodalitas Fibrinensis, a dining club mutual aid society. The club debated his journal and embraced his belief that long commands create private armies. In 82 BC, he married Cornelia, a practical woman from a minor branch of the Corneli family. Sabinus carefully avoided the open factionalism of the time. He praised bravery in Marius and discipline in Sulla, yet bound himself to neither cult. Behind the scenes, he drafted De Imperis Annuis, a private tract arguing that annual commands, legions, rotated between provinces and soldiers, paid from a central treasury, were the only way to prevent another Sulla. Sabinus entered formal public life in 74 BC, when he was elected quaestor in the province of Asia, serving under Lucius Licinius Lucullus. He audited tax farmer accounts and published monthly ledgers in Ephesus and Pergamon. The locals called him the quaestor who counts in the open. Lucullus tolerated his transparency because the troops received their pay on time. Sabinus also standardized muster rolls so that soldiers' pay was tied to a central list in Rome rather than to the general's whims. and he drafted an early version of the Lex Sacramenti, a law that would switch the military oath of allegiance from a personal commander to the Senate and people of Rome. The Roman military oath, the Sacramenta Militare, traditionally bound soldiers to obey the consul or later the emperor. Sabinus wanted them instead to swear each year to the Republic. Upon returning to Rome, he ran grain logistics from Ostia at his own expense, dredging shoals and building a pilot granary in Arpinum. Elected tribune of the plebs in 73 BC, he introduced several quiet but far-reaching reforms. The Lex Tabularia Perfecta strengthened the secret ballot laws, eliminating colored wax and ballot escorts and curtailing vote buying. The Lex Stipendi Limitis capped provincial levies and shifted Sicily from tax farming to a fixed stipend with state-run grain contracts, lowering prices for consumers and squeezing profiteers. The Lex Collegia Civica legalized civic associations to train municipal youths in accounting, surveying, and correspondence. Sabinus personally funded the training of 150 youths, placing them with provincial officials and commanders. These clerks sent him reports and would later form a corps of administrators who owed loyalty to the Republic, not to individual patrons. As he explained to his club, a state cannot survive if it relies on the moral restraint of ambitious men. It must build institutions and cadres. In 71 BC, he became aedile, refurbishing markets, reorganizing grain queues by lot to reduce riots, and prosecuting minor magistrates for graft using only public accounts. He also built new granaries at Ostia, cutting grain prices and earning a reputation as a provider of bread and jobs. 2 years later, as praetor presiding over the extortion court, he partnered with Marcus Tullius Cicero to refine jury instructions. They experimented with mixed juries of senators and equites, and emphasized evidence tables over purple rhetoric. He published the SPQR oath tablets in the Forum, and sent copies to towns across Italy, encouraging civic ceremonies in which citizens swore loyalty to the state rather than to charismatic leaders. The conservative Optimates saw the tablets as a return to the mos maiorum, while the radical populares and ambitious generals viewed them as an attempt to bind the army's loyalty to the Senate. Average soldiers remained indifferent. For them, loyalty followed their pay and their general. By the late 60s BC, Sabinus had built a small but real power base. Municipal elites across Latium and Campania, grain shippers at Ostia, reform-minded equites, jurists who prized procedure, and a rising orator named Cicero. His opponents included publicani, whose margins he cut, and urban brokers who thrived on ballot tricks. Sabinus branded himself the open book quaestor, a man of ledgers rather than speeches, but he knew that ledgers alone would not stop a tyrant. He began to draft a strategy blueprint consisting of 6 pillars. First, his Lex Sacramenti and Aeraria Militare laws, which would create a dedicated military treasury funded by inheritance levies and provincial customs, including an annual oath to the Senate and people of Rome, duplicate service books kept in the province and at Rome. Soldiers' loyalty and pensions would depend on the state. Next, he wanted to introduce time-boxed commands and rotation under the law Lex de Imperis Annuis. This would create provincial commands capped at 12 months, extendable once by a Senate supermajority, a 6-month cooling-off period in Italy before any further military post, state-owned legionary eagles rotating between provinces, and he hoped this would break the personal army flywheel. Next, he would address provincial justice and revenue under his Lex Provincia, which would create standard charters for municipalities and provinces, mixed juries, public posting of accounts, key breadbasket provinces moved to fixed stipends rather than tax farming. Next, he would address elections and anti-ambitus under his Lex Comitialis, which would enforce secret ballots, impose spending ceilings, and punish vote buying with lifetime disqualification and restitution. After that, his Lex Italiae would address Italian integration by rebalancing tribes, guaranteeing levy rotation quotas, and further standardizing municipal charters, completing the incorporation begun after the Social War. The next pillar would address civic cadre and schools under his Institutum Civili, a state-endorsed academy on the Aventine to train quaestors, clerks, and surveyors. Graduates would form a professional civil service. These were ambitious reforms, yet Sabinus knew he could not force them through at once. He would need to time his initiatives, build alliances, and take advantage of crises to extract concessions from more charismatic rivals. By 68 BC, Cilician pirates operated as a quasi-state, raiding the Italian coast, sacking Delos, and disrupting the grain supply from Egypt and the Black Sea. The urban plebs, who had benefited from Sabinus's grain reforms, now faced skyrocketing prices. In 67 BC, the tribune Aulus Gabinius proposed the Lex Gabinia, a law granting Pompey the Great proconsular powers over every province within 50 miles of the Mediterranean to combat the pirates. The law allowed Pompey to appoint multiple legates and gave him control of vast military and financial resources. The Senate was wary of granting such power to one man, remembering Sulla's dictatorship. But the people were hungry and desperate. They wanted bread and safety, not lectures on constitutional propriety. Sabinus, Cicero, and the Optimates opposed the law. Sabinus argued that the pirate threat should be met by the state through a permanent navy with rotating commands, not by a single savior. He urged that if a special command was necessary, the Senate should appoint multiple praetors and subject them to term limits. Gemini's simulation revealed how public opinion turned against Sabinus. His reasoned speeches were drowned out by cries for a hero. The Lex Gabinia passed amid scenes of mob intimidation. In the simulation, as in history, Pompey used his extraordinary powers to clear the Mediterranean in 3 months, cementing his popularity. For Sabinus, this defeat served as a learning experience. He realized that opposing a popular commander head-on would only isolate him. Instead, he needed to harness the political momentum of strongmen while embedding his institutional reforms. When the tribune Gaius Manilius proposed the Lex Manilia in 66 BC, transferring the Eastern War against Mithridates from ineffective commanders to Pompey, Sabinus did not oppose it outright. The Manilian law in history removed Lucullus, Glabrio, and Marcius Rex from their commands, and gave Pompey control over the Third Mithridatic War. Sabinus negotiated behind the scenes and had a friendly tribune propose a pairing law, the Lex Custodia Imperi, or Law on Guarding Command. The bill required that Pompey's legates be named publicly and be removable by the Senate, and that all war loot and revenues be posted on bronze tablets in Rome and the province within 60 days, and that a tenth of the spoils be deposited into a new aerarium militare, and that troops renew their oath to the Republic annually. In public, Sabinus told the plebs, "Let Pompey go, and let Rome keep the leash." After fierce debate, a compromise passed. The Senate lost the right to name legates, but the requirement for posted accounts, the war loot tithe, and the oath remained. Pompey got his command. Sabinus got the core of his financial and oath reforms. In the simulation, this was judged a strategic victory disguised as a tactical defeat. By embedding transparency and state funding into a charismatic general's campaign, Sabinus normalized the idea that extraordinary commands should be audited and contribute to a military pension fund. Sabinus then reintroduced his proposal for a permanent navy, this time as the Lex de Classe Publica, establishing a Tyrrhenian home fleet with rotating praetorian commanders. By tying the bill to jobs for the urban plebs, such as dredging, shipbuilding, and storekeeping, and cost stability for merchants, he won broad support. Marcus Crassus, Rome's richest man, quietly backed the measure because reliable convoys benefited his shipping interests. The law passed and became one of the pillars of Sabinus's later reforms. In 65 BC, Sabinus requested the governorship of Sicily. The Senate, eager to remove him from Rome and test his methods elsewhere, agreed. In Sicily, he implemented convoy scheduling, warehouse rotation, and honest weights and measures with ruthless efficiency. He appointed clerks from the Collegia Civica to key posts, enforced the fixed stipend system, and published every denarius of revenue and expenditure. By the end of his term, the price of Sicilian grain landed at Ostia had fallen by 8%. He returned to Rome without personal enrichment, but with a delegation of grateful Sicilians, and bronze tablets documenting his accounts. His brand as the open book quaestor had become reality. Meanwhile, Pompey's loot from the east began arriving in Rome, and thanks to the Lex Custodia Imperi, the spoils were audited by Cato the Younger and by Sabinus's clerks. The unprecedented transparency made many senators uncomfortable. They preferred the old days when generals distributed war loot among friends. Yet it also meant that the aerarium militare was flushed. As the simulation progressed, Sabinus's network reported that Equides and the Publicani syndicates accepted the new system because it provided stability. In exchange, Sabinus sponsored a decree to reschedule Asian tax farmers' overbids and cut them modestly, winning Marcus Crassus's neutrality. During the Catilinarian conspiracy of 63 BC, Sabinus's intelligence network proved decisive. He passed verified reports of illegal musters and arms shipments to Cicero, who was then consul. After the conspirators were arrested, the Senate debated their fate. Cato demanded execution. Caesar argued for life imprisonment. Sabinus, echoing his maxims about justice, sided with Caesar in principle. Executing citizens without trial would set a dangerous precedent. Cicero, under pressure, executed the conspirators anyway. Nevertheless, Sabinus' reputation as a defender of the Republic and of due process was enhanced, and he used the heightened desire for order to push through two of his keystone reforms. The Lex Sacramentate in Populum made the oath to the Republic annual and universal. The Lex Aurarii Militaris formally created the military treasury funded by war loot tithes, customs, and inheritance taxes. Sabinus chose not to introduce the Lex de Imperis Annuus yet. Pompey was about to return from the east, and a direct attack on term lengths would appear as a slight. By the end of 63 BC, Sabinus had built what the simulation called the Institutionalist faction, a coalition of moderate optimates, reformist equites, municipals, and Cicero's supporters. He declared his candidacy for the consulship of 62 BC. He also nurtured relationships with Cato, who had become his moral enforcer, and with Crassus, whose business interests aligned with stability. Sabinus was elected consul for 62 BC alongside Decimus Junius Silanus. His strategic aim was to absorb Pompey into the state without provoking him, to prevent a Pompey-Caesar-Crassus alliance, and to institutionalize reforms so that they would become habits. He anticipated that Pompey would land at Brundisium in early 62 with veteran legions, flush with spoils and expecting a hostile Senate. Sabinus crafted a golden bridge strategy. He drafted a senatorial decree offering immediate discharge bonuses and pensions from the Aeraria Militare, guaranteed ratification of Pompey's eastern settlements, and a triumph, but on condition that Pompey disband his army at Brundisium, and that all troops renew their oath to the Republic on the 1st of March. He personally led a senatorial delegation to Brundisium and addressed the veterans. You bled for Rome. Your pay and land are in law, in the treasury, and ready today. No petitions to patrons. The simulation predicted that Pompey, surprised by honor instead of hostility, would accept. That is exactly what happened. Pompey disbanded his legions on the spot, praised the Senate and Sabinus, and watched as his veterans took the oath to the Republic before dissolving into civilians. In the Forum, Cato chaired public readings of the accounts from the Eastern Campaign. The people saw names and sums on bronze tablets and embraced accountability. Sabinus' critics were stunned. He had tamed the Republic's greatest general without a fight. Then, in March, Sabinus introduced two co-branded bills, the Lex Pompeia Sabina de Provincies Ordinantes and the Lex Colonarium Veterinarorum. The first ratified Pompey's treaties and reorganizations en bloc, provided they adopted standard provincial charters, fixed custom schedules, and annual postal accounts. It also established a commission of 15, which included Pompey, Catulus, and Cato, to codify the charters and reaffirm the 10% per tithe on loot from the war. The second bill funded veteran settlements from the military treasury, voluntary donations from Pompey's spoils, and a temporary luxury tax in Rome. Land was to be acquired by purchase or recovery of public land, not by confiscations. A dispersed settlement map across Etruria, Samnium, Lucania, Cisalpine Gaul, and selected eastern towns prevented the formation of a concentrated block. Each colony came with a charter, a survey, a cistern, and a paid schoolmaster from the Collegia Civica to bind veterans of civic life. A mixed board with Cato and a veteran tribune oversaw the process. These measures more than satisfied Pompey's veterans and denied Caesar a populist issue and cut the legs out from under any future promise of an agrarian law. As the simulation notes, Caesar, who had intended to champion the veterans' cause, was forced to vote for Sabinus' bill or risk appearing obstinate. Sabinus continued neutralizing rivals by giving them prestige without power. He appointed Pompey as curator of the Tiber, ports, and granaries, a job requiring real work, but no army. He assigned Caesar as praetor urbanus for 62 BC, the prestigious but non-military task of restoring the Via Flaminia and other northern roads. At the end of Caesar's praetorship, Sabinus arranged for him to govern Hispania Ulterior with a single legion and a 1-year term. To Cato, he entrusted the quarterly account readings in the Forum. To Crassus, he offered contracts for road repairs, dredging, and warehouse construction, transparently bid and capped, thus keeping him invested in the system. Sabinus' messaging was consistent. Heroes win battles. Institutions keep your children fed. Perhaps the most subtle achievement of his consulship was the Lex de Calendario Impere, presented as a dry, technical measure. The law stipulated that all provincial and extraordinary commands automatically expired on the 31st of December of their final year, that prorogations required a recorded vote, and that no general could take another military post without spending 6 months in Italy. It also required that lists of legates be filled in advance, and that substitutions be posted with reasons. The law quietly destroyed the old practice of endless proconsular commands, which had enabled men like Sulla to build personal empires. By the end of Sabinus's consular year, Gemini's simulation credited him with absorbing the single greatest threat to the Republic. Pompey became a private citizen with honors but no legions, integrated in the state boards. Caesar was preparing to leave for Hispania with limited resources. Crassus had no grievances, and the conditions that historically produced the first triumvirate, 3 men united by mutual frustrations, had evaporated. The Republic, however, was still vulnerable. Sabinus' system was law, but it had not yet faced a crisis or determined opponent. He therefore looked ahead to the next 3 years, anticipating Caesar's return and planning to make the Sabinian system irreversible. In 60 BC, Caesar returned from Hispania Ulterior, laden with glory and freed of debt. He wished both to celebrate a triumph and to stand for the consulship of 59 BC. Roman law required that a man seeking a triumph remain outside the city, and a man seeking office had to enter the Pomerium. Caesar asked for an exemption to stand in absentia. Sabinus had already passed 2 laws, the Lex de Petitione Consulare and the Lex de Prescriptione Triumphorum, which prohibited in absentia candidacies and reaffirmed that imperium holders awaiting a triumph could not be candidates. The Senate, led by Sabinus, Cicero, and Cato, politely declined Caesar's request. Cornered, Caesar surrendered his right to a triumph, entered the city, and registered as a candidate. According to the simulation, he never forgave this humiliation, and began to view Sabinus not just as a rival, but as the architect of a system designed to cage him. With public attention focused on Caesar's consular campaign, Sabinus quietly tabled the Lex de Imperis Annuus, framed as a peace dividend that merely tidied up practices already common. The law capped provincial commands at 12 months, with one 12-month renewal, required cooling-off periods, and mandated that legionary eagles rotate under state control. There was grumbling from senators who dreamed of extended glory, but Pompey was content, Cato applauded this, and the people were distracted. The law passed, completing the legal mechanism that prevented the accumulation of private armies. Caesar became consul in 59 BC, but Sabinus' institutionalist bloc rallied behind Marcus Calpurnius Bibulus, who won the other. The provinces for the year had already been pre-assigned as civil posts pursuant to the calendar law, so Caesar could not easily claim a lucrative command. Throughout his consulship, he faced hostile colleagues and a senate that demanded adherence to procedure. In the simulation, Caesar proposed land laws and tried to circumvent term limits, but the Lex de Negotio Singulare required single-subject bills, the fiscal score requirement mandated proof of funding, and the Senate rejected omnibus measures. Caesar found himself supervising road repairs and court schedules, his rhetoric wasted on infrastructure. Sabinus announced his candidacy for the censorship of 58 BC, ideally with Cato as his colleague. The office of censor carried immense moral authority. Censors compiled the Senate roll, supervised the census, enforced public morals, and carried out the lustrum purification ritual. Sabinus' plan was to use the censorship to lock in his reforms by purging corrupt senators, rebalancing tribes to reflect post-social war citizenship, codifying his weights and measures, and building an archivum populi for public records and fusing the oath of the Republic in the lustrum ritual. He aimed, quote, to make the Sabinian system bone deep. Elected censor alongside Cato, Sabinus executed his program with ruthless precision. In the Lectio Senatus, they removed dozens of senators for proven extortion and ambitus, publishing the reasons on bronze tablets. They reviewed the equites list, striking tax farm directors who violated fee caps, and requiring public ledgers from societas heads. They enrolled citizens into tribes based on actual residence rather than patronage, completing the Italian integration that had begun with the Lex Italiae. This tribal rebalancing diluted the influence of Rome's urban demagogues and made the voting assemblies more representative of the peninsula. They issued edicts and standards requiring stamped weights and measures, mandated brick stamps naming the maker, and earmarked fines for the military treasury. They founded the Archivum Populi in the Atrium Libertatis, a central archive where laws, accounts, and provincial charters were filled with uniform forms and a public reading desk. They expanded the Tabularium and required monthly abstracts from every magistrate and governor. Sabinus thus institutionalized transparency and standardized bureaucracy. The message was clear. As Sabinus said, quote, "We keep faith by keeping books." The censors also continued to oversee the veteran colonies, pushing another 3,000 deeds of land through and providing municipal schoolmasters for each settlement. They appointed Caesar, now a private citizen following his consular year, as curator of the Via Appia and Aqua Marcia, with no legions, with monthly account obligations. When Caesar's allies attempted to secure him a 5-year Gallic command via plebiscite, Sabinus's guardrails activated. The single subject rule stripped out land grants, the fiscal score requirement exposed a lack of funds, and the censors publicly offered Caesar a lawful 1-year command in Cisalpine Gaul and Illyricum with a colleague. Caesar accepted. To refuse would be to reveal that he sought more than frontier defense. In 57 BC, Sabinus finally passed the shelved Lex Italia, standardizing municipal charters, levy quotas, and appeal routes and finishing Italian integration. He professionalized the Vigiles, Rome's night watch, and launched an ambitious enforcement blitz with surprise spending checks. When Clodius Pulcher stirred up street violence, the Vigiles and Aediles contained it without creating martyrs. In 56 BC, a genuine crisis erupted. The Helvetii migrated, and the warlord Ariovistus led Suebi across the Rhine. Thanks to Sabinus's Lex de Tumulto et Lore, emergencies were boxed. 2 consuls received collegial imperium for 12 months. Pompey was appointed advisory legate without supremacy. Funds flowed from the area militare, and daily receipts were posted. The armies, commanded by elected officials and advised by Pompey, decisively defeated the Helvetii and drove Ariovistus back. They returned and disbanded on schedule, celebrating triumphs without creating new strongmen. This was the ultimate test of the system. It fought and won a major war while obeying its own laws. Around this time, Sabinus completed the legal architecture. He chartered the Institutum Civile, turning the Collegia Civica into a formal civil service academy, with examinations for clerks and provincial staff. Glory was redirected from swords to stone and ledgers. Young nobles now studied accounting at the Institutum Civile. Senators competed for curatorships of roads and aqueducts. Generals served for a season and then returned. Gemini's simulation paused in 56 BC, with the verdict that the Sabinian system had become the new Mos Maiorum. The Republic was resilient, prosperous, and bound by law. Caesar was a lion in a well-built cage, admired for his brilliance, yet prevented from accumulating power. Pompey was a respected elder statesman. Crassus remained rich but invested in transparency. Cato enforced audits. Sabinus himself, now princeps senatus in practice if not in title, faded into an elder statesman whose system continued without him.